Hello, listeners. Welcome to yet another episode of Courage Talks. Special guest today is Gopika Kapoor. She is an author, journalist, neurodiversity consultant, and a champion for autism. Welcome, Gopika.
Thank you so much, Hital. So looking forward to being here and having this very interesting conversation with you.
Thanks, Gopika. So the topic is Courage Talks, and the story behind Courage Talks is my book, Against All Odds. That's my father's biography. And when I was listening to my dad narrating his childhood, I realized there were a lot of elements or a lot of instances where he displayed a lot of courage. And that's what prompted me to
Right.
start this podcast. What does courage mean to you?
Okay. I think courage just means, it's a very big loaded word, but I don't think that courageous acts have to be big. I think sometimes it's just putting one foot in front of the other. It's just getting up every morning and doing what needs to be done. So I think courage for me is in the small acts that we all do. It's also something which seems to be very special, but I think everybody is courageous. I think every single person, we don't know it, is dealing with something or the other. And so I think courage is not something which is very kind of exclusive, nor is it something which is very special. I think it exists in everybody.
Any role models? Anyone you look up for courage?
Actually, that's a tough one. I don't. I think for me, every single parent who I see, especially the parents who have kids, needs which may be different from those of people who are neurotypical, whether it is a medical issue, whether it is a developmental issue, whether it is an issue of mental illness. I think they are really my role models because they just get through circumstances which are so extenuating, and it's not just necessarily the child. It could be financial, it could be familial, it could be a relationship problem, whatever else it is, and they get through it. And so I really think for me those are the real role models.
We know a lot about what you are today, the journalist, the author, but not many people might know about your growing up days and your childhood. So why don't you just take us down memory lane? Where did you grow up? What are the initial instances of childhood that stay with you? And if there's any interesting anecdote that you would like to share from your early days.
Sure. So I grew up the youngest of three. There's a gap of 10 years between me and my brother and 14 between me and my sister. Very much the baby of the family, very pampered, very spoiled. But my parents, actually, I have to say, were really incredible. So while I was extremely pampered, I don't think I was spoiled in that sense. I did not grow up with a sense of entitlement at all. My dad was a very, very eminent plastic surgeon in the city. And because they were much older, my dad was 45, my mom was 38 when I was born. I could spend a lot of time with them because I think by then my dad had kind of established his career. And so when I was growing up, he was taking things a little bit easier. And I grew up and I spent a ton of time with him and my mom. Very, very influential on my life in many ways. My dad was an extremely dynamic man, president of the Rotary Club, trekker, somebody who was a fantastic public speaker. And he had a tremendous and continues to have a tremendous influence on me. We lost him when I was only 19, but even today, I can very, very strongly feel his impact in my life. My mom has always been there since then. She just turned 90, touch wood. And she has been like the constant in my life. She's taught me what if my dad taught me the dynamism, I think my mom taught me the softer, gentler aspects of life, what compassion is, how to look at things positively, how to just be able to have the guts to get up every day and walk and do what has to be done. So all that I learned from her, and really had a fantastic childhood growing up in Bombay in the 80s. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. And one thing that really, that a childhood memory that I remember, which kind of is very, very crucial and which I think shaped a large part of what I am today, was I was about, I think, 11 or 12. And we had a dog, and my dad was going to the club to swim, and the club had this ground attached to it. So he said, okay, come on, we're going to take the dog and you walk in the dog in the ground while I go for my swim. And I was this typical preteen, very, very conscious of how I looked, very conscious of everybody looking at me, thinking I was like this, it was just such an awkward time to be a preteen. And I remember walking the dog, and in the distance I could see people, and he said, "Do you see them?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Is anybody looking at you?" I said, "No." He said, "Stop living your life like people are looking at you all the time." And I was about 11 or 12 when he said this. And this is something which impacts me today, because I think when we do things with the thought of log kya kahenge, what will people
Yeah.
say? People are looking at me. I think it stops us from doing a lot of things that we want to do. And I really feel that it's made a big difference in my life, because when I feel like that, and all of us do at some point of time, I remember that. And I remember that nobody is looking at me, and people are too busy in their own lives. And so I should just go and do whatever I want to do without worrying what people will think.
Well, that's a very important learning. And I guess, once, and if you learn that early in your life, as you did, your life
Yeah,
can be far more sorted, because many times if you learn it late, then the learnings don't have as much value as well. For sure.
absolutely.
That makes sense.
Absolutely.
What did you want to become while growing up? What was your childhood ambition like?
Always wanted to be a writer. Always, always, always. It was, I think, when I was growing up, other girls dreamt of being air hostesses, and some dreamt of being actresses. And I always wanted to be a writer. Always. It was just my childhood dream.
And you did a lot of writing in school and college as well?
Yes, I did a lot of writing in school. I loved writing essays. I was very good at English. I loved creative writing. Friends of mine and I, at various points of time, wrote silly, cheesy romances and all sorts of stuff. Even in college, came out with silly magazines, did a lot of writing, majored in English literature, did my bachelor's in English literature, and then my master's in journalism. So it was clearly something which I wanted to do. I started freelancing quite early on for various newspapers and publications. And
Right.
for me to see my name, my byline was like the biggest thrill when I was in college. It was such a big thrill for me. And so that was just it just came so naturally to me to write, that it was just something that I knew that I would do for the rest of my life.
So, in terms of writing, who was your early inspiration? Who did you ape, or I wouldn't say ape, but who was your benchmark or an idol at that point of time?
Actually, it's strange because I write almost exclusively nonfiction, and yet I'm a very, very avid fiction reader. I have what I call the Amitabh Ghosh test, which is that if I can't write like Amitabh Ghosh, I will not write fiction, and I'll never be able to write like Amitabh Ghosh. So basically, fiction is not an option for me at all. In terms of nonfiction, I remember when I was studying journalism in the US, we had a really fantastic book of essays which were written by different writers who wrote in The Atlantic, The New Yorker, The Washington Post. And these were all feature articles which followed a long investigative journalism story. And for me, all the writers in that book, I can't remember the name of the book. I've got it somewhere at the back of my cupboard, but they were all such fantastically written articles that for me, that was really like the benchmark, like a really well researched, well written piece of nonfiction was, to me, the absolute kind of, the best kind of writing that there could exist. And like I said, I'm a very, very avid reader. I read a lot. And so to say, was there one piece of writing that influenced me? I don't think so. I think it was just about everything that I read influenced me.
But one of the big things which is talked about a lot is, of course, and you started writing back in those days, pre-internet days, when the number of options were limited. And now that where you are today from where you started off, do you think you are extremely lucky, or you are extremely talented, or it's just that it's a combination of multiple things working out for you right from start?
I think I was lucky. I think I also worked hard. And I think talent is something which honestly you can have a little bit of, but it's something which has to be nurtured. I don't think anyone is born with like bucket loads of talent which you can rely on by itself. I think there has to be a combination of luck, talent, and hard work. And so I would say that yes, I did have a little bit of talent, because the thing is, if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to get anywhere. So
Yeah.
yes, that talent was there, but I also had luck. I had the hard work and I had the circumstances. And I think that also plays a very, very tremendous role. I was always encouraged to write. I was always encouraged to read. I was never told, don't have your nose in a book all the time. And I
Mhm.
think, given the country we live in and the majority of girls who are uneducated or undereducated and forced to leave school to either help out with the family or work or, basically not be able to spend that time with their nose in a book, I feel it was a tremendous sense of privilege. So circumstance, luck, talent, and hard work are all, I think, responsible for getting me where I am.
A while back, you mentioned that you were pampered, yet you were not spoiled. And as far as your writing is concerned, you acknowledge that you were lucky, but you acknowledge that you did have
Yeah.
some base level of talent to start with. When opportunity comes to you without too much of a hard work, there are chances that you become complacent and you might not put in as much effort in the work as you probably could have.
Right.
Did that happen to you at any point of time? Did you take your position for granted and took things easy? Did you have to regret that at any point of time? Were there any instances where you had to kind of rewrite or recompose stuff that you would have thought otherwise would have got through?
So I think that's two separate things. So I'll answer the second part first. So did I
Yeah.
have to rewrite things? Yes. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times I lost stuff which I'd written, and then suddenly there'd be a power outage or something would happen, and or I hadn't saved it and something would happen. I think maybe the first time I was really upset, but after that time, I realized that what I wrote the second time turned out even better than what I wrote the first time, and I would do it immediately. And as we were talking about lessons from childhood and instances that you told me to recollect, I remember my mom telling me, she's a fantastic baker, and I used to bake with her, and she would tell me, she said, if your cake is not right, chuck it out and start over again immediately. And I think this was really a life lesson that I learned
Wow.
from her, because it's like, if something doesn't work, if it's not happened, throw it out, but start immediately. Don't wait for things to happen. So do it again, do it over again immediately.
Right.
And so that happened. I think in terms of getting complacent and taking the privilege for granted, no, because I think I was brought up in an atmosphere that was always one of giving back. I mentioned that my dad was president of the Rotary Club, and he would literally take me along for all his. He was also a doctor, so he would have clinics with underprivileged populations.
Yeah.
He would have all sorts of camps in rural villages and things like that. And I was witness to all this. And, so it was from the get-go. I also went to school, which was very, very, I think, very community-driven in a sense. And I had friends from all sorts of backgrounds. I don't think nobody really bothered about where you were from and how much money your parents had or what sort of car your parents drove or whether you took a bus or what it was. It really didn't matter. I think the inequities were not as much then as they are now. And so it wasn't something that really came to my mind. And so in that sense, that privilege was not something that I took for granted at all.
And one of the crazy things associated with writers is the writer's block, the fear of the blank page. Did it ever strike you, or you can confidently say you never were in those league of
No.
ordinary
I
people?
don't think I think that would be arrogance on my part to say it never struck me. Of course, it did, and it continues to. What I did do was that I realized that very early on, I remember reading an interview by some writer. I can't remember who it was. And that writer said this whole thing of inspiration striking and you just writing is all hogwash. It's not true. Writing is discipline. It's a craft and you have to work at it. And I think that kind of, seared itself onto my brain. And so every time I've written, I've followed a pattern, starting from my first book where I would write when my children went to play school. So the minute they left the house, I would run to my desk, start typing, and keep writing until I could hear the doorbell ringing. I would save and go to them. And it's not that I was necessarily writing, because like you said, that, it's not that inspiration is going to strike all the time. There is going to be writer's block. There are going to be times when you're not going to be able to see, to be able to get words onto the page. But I made sure that I did not get up from that chair. So whatever it is I was doing. If I was researching, I could think of chapter titles, I could re-look at what I was doing, I could find sources from the bibliography, I could do whatever. But I made myself aware that I was not allowed to get up from that chair. I could only get up from the chair if I had to go to the bathroom, but otherwise I would sit on that chair and not leave. And so eventually with that, what happens is you build up some sort of discipline, and it just, the writing just happened.
Your initial writings were a lot around spirituality, and what prompted you to embrace spirituality at such a young age? The related question to that is, did that help you to really manage yourself when you really needed to have a spiritual bent of mind later in life?
For me, spirituality is really, I think it's like a muscle, right? So when you go to the gym, you have to lift weights every day if you want that muscle to grow. And so that when it eventually comes to you lifting a really heavy suitcase, you're going to be able to rely on those muscles to help you lift it up. And so spirituality actually came into my life. I think I must have been barely few days pregnant. I think it's my children who kind of led me down this path. And my mom-in-law would always tell me, why don't you go to these classes? And I'd dismiss them. And then something made me say yes. She said, my husband's aunt was starting a class, and she said, would you like to go? And something said, say yes. So I said, okay. And I went to these classes. It was Vedanta classes by the Chinmaya Mission, and it changed my entire worldview. It was like the way I was seeing the world was literally toppled upside down, and I was looking at it completely anew. It was a fantastic way to look at the world. And then I was on bed rest, and because I was having twins, and I was surprised that I was feeling fine about it. I didn't complain about it. That whole period of bed rest is when I studied. I continued to study. When my twins were born, I was surprisingly calm. I did not get overexcited. I did not get hyperactive. I didn't get stressed out at all. I was able to manage things calmly. And I think the biggest time that it helped me was when we got my son's diagnosis of autism. Because the way that, I'm not saying it didn't take me time. I'm not saying that I did everything correctly, but that strength that it gave me was something which was so important to help me get out of that feeling that I was experiencing of that despondency, and to be able to take action and start again, because that is really the essence of what Vedanta and the Gita is all about.
You remember the early conversations you and Mohit had at the time when the diagnosis came through? What were the first thoughts which came to the mind? What was the first reaction?
Yeah, I remember very clearly. It was the 4th of January, 2008. We had lost our way to the clinic. We reached about 15-20 minutes late, and then we went in, and I had gone in expecting a diagnosis of dyslexia, and we were told that it was autism. And I came out, and I remember we caught a cab, and we sat down in the cab, and both of us were crying. And I just looked at him and I said, what are we going to do? And he said, I don't know. And it was that feeling of extreme helplessness, because you were faced with a situation that you did not expect to face in life. We walked in with a child who we thought we knew, and we came out with a child who we didn't know how to help anymore. And I remember that feeling in the pit of my stomach, just that sinking feeling of what is my life going to be like now. I do not know what I'm going to do with my life. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. I don't know how I'm going to raise my children. What am I going to do? It was literally like standing in front of a black tunnel that was just going to go on and on and on, and you had to walk into it, and that was the way it was. I very clearly remember that sinking feeling, and that was really the day that our lives changed so much that, there was really a distinct before and after.
And back in 2008, when this happened, was the awareness around autism as much as it is today? What were the clear aspects which stood out between what is there now versus what is there? What it was there then?
So this weekend, I was talking to a bunch of parents. I was doing a talk with them, and I was in Delhi, and I I was talking to these parents of who go to a therapy center, and I was telling them, I said, think back to a time when there was no Instagram, there was very little bit of Facebook, there was no self advocates, no disability influencers, no parent influencers, no Sheldon Cooper, no My Name is Khan, no Good Doctor, no Atypical. None of these shows existed. Autism was not in. It was not a word people knew. People did not know what it meant. The
And
only
I think they considered it a bimari, which was more like looking down on
exactly
it.
it was, and even now a lot of people say it's a disease, but I think in cities people know what it is more or less. But at that time there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. So first we had to educate ourselves and say, okay, what is this thing, and what does it mean for our child? And then once we educated ourselves, then we had to figure out how to tell our families
Yeah.
and how to tell our friends, and
Especially
there would be,
grandparents, right? I think they are the more difficult ones to understand
yeah,
because their love
and
is so high, and then there's a big ambiguity
exactly.
comes in. Yeah.
So it's this whole thing that, and what caused it, we don't know, because there really isn't even now a known cause for autism. So what caused it? I mean, that would be the first question, like, how did this happen? We don't know. We didn't have the answer for it. And so all these things were really, really tough back then. But we had to somehow kind of, plow on, had to start therapies with Veer, start taking him for therapies. And I think, and at the same time, make sure that our daughter was okay, make sure that she also didn't feel neglected and not attended to. And so it was this constant balancing and juggling act, which was absolutely exhausting. Those early years are just one big blur in my mind, in a sense.
You mentioned somewhere about these 5 stages of grief. You want to elaborate on how did you conceptualize it
Yeah.
purely from your own experience? And does the culture around the society have an impact on these 5 stages? Or have you seen it more or less universal across the world?
So the 5 stages of grief have been conceptualized by Dr. 𝗧𝗹𝗂𝗏𝗏. She is an extremely well-known teacher and writer, and she is somebody who has talked about the 5 stages of grief that anybody goes through when there is a death or any sort of kind of incident. Now, this kind of situation, which I found myself in, and which thousands of parents find themselves in, is called accidental grief. So accidental grief is something where, like, you expect parents to grieve for a child who dies. This is the grief that you feel for a child whom you thought you had, and a future that you thought you would have. So, and it's accidental because the thing is that this child is still very much
You're
alive.
literally grieving for someone who's still around.
Yes, you're grieving for someone who's around, but you are grieving for the idea of the child you think they would have been, and the kind of parent you think you would have been, and the kind of life that you would have had. So that's why it's called accidental grief. It's something which goes on for a long time until you reach that stage of acceptance. And so each of these stages, starting from denial, then you go through, there's denial, there's sadness, there's bargaining, there's anger, and then of course it comes to acceptance. So there's no timeline, and everybody's journey through this is something which is absolutely their own. There is no fixed timeline. There is no kind of fixed journey that everybody has. It's just their own journey. And what happens is that you go through these emotions, and sometimes you may feel sadness, but you can also feel extreme anger. And you may also be, have this sense of bargaining where you're feeling like, no, if I do this, this will go away. If I do this, this will not happen. And even as you start to accept, there are still shades of anger. There is still shades of sadness. I remember, like, I would sometimes, until not so long back, I mean, I had totally accepted who my son was, but I might have felt some sadness, when I would look at other kids doing stuff which maybe he would not be able to do, or having, going out with a bunch of friends, and he was not going out with he didn't have any friends then. So at times like that, even though there was acceptance, there would still have been sadness, there might still have been anger, there might still have been that sense of okay, if I do this, then maybe he'll kind of start being more social, or being more start learning more, or whatever else it is. So yeah, so I think it's just, while it's called stages of grief, it's not necessarily that they happen one after the other, like in a chronological way.
In situations like this, it's always useful to talk one-on-one with someone who's already gone through that.
Yes.
Who was that in your case? Did you come across a co-parent, or?
No, I did not. I did not come across a co-parent. Again, things were very loosely organized in those days. So while I did know other parents, and I did get some sort of sense of comfort from them, there wasn't really anybody like that in my life. And so I think that is why I started working with parents, and I started realizing that I have to be that parent to the other parents, and I have to be the one who will give them that sense of hope, and who will just kind of tell them, what, it's going to be okay. And so that's why I started like working with parents consciously, to be able to talk to them and just tell them that their life would be okay, that yes, it would be difficult, it won't be similar to the kind of childhood or the kind of parenting experience that their neurotypical sibling or friends might, their sibling or friends parenting a neurotypical child might have, but that would not necessarily make it any less rewarding or any less wonderful.
And then you joined Ummeed as a junior therapist, and you've gone on to be making an impact in lives of 400 plus families now. Any experience or any interaction which has stayed with you? Anything that was the toughest? Anything that has still stayed on? I mean, I'm sure many of these parents would have stayed connected with you. Anything that you would like to narrate?
Yeah, I joined Ummeed as a junior therapist, and there was no training in those days. I mean, there was no, like, I could join. It's not that I needed to be trained or have a master's in psychology to go there. I was trained by my mentor, Dolores Holmes Sheelan, who was this amazing woman. Dolores and her husband, Bob, were this amazing couple who came to India. Their son was a diplomat over here, and they came here, and Dolores had worked with autistic individuals. And so they just came to Ummeed one day, and they just fell in love with the place, and everybody at Ummeed fell in love with them. And literally in one meeting, it was decided that they would come every year from Jan to April and would train everybody at Ummeed. Bob would work on management systems, and Dolores would work with the autism intervention team. And so Dolores is the one who trained me, and she was just absolutely fantastic. I could not have asked for a better teacher. So while I did not have a degree or a certificate or a diploma, I had Dolores, and she was just really, really amazing. So I started working over there, and I think every single one of the kids taught me something. They were just fantastic. And I think what Dolores taught me and the other people who were working as therapists was that you have to see things. If you want to get through to a child, you have to see things from their point of view. I remember she had said that you have to go to the level where they are. And that meant that you have to physically go down to their level so that you can make it easier for them to make eye contact and for you to be able to connect with them. But you also have to go to their level in terms of what their understanding, in terms of what their interests, what their perspective is. And actually, when you think about it, that's really good advice, because whenever you're caught in, like, a negotiation, or you're caught in a discussion or an argument with somebody, if you go to their level and you really see things from their perspective, it's so much easier to resolve. And I mean, she taught us all these lessons of therapy, but honestly, they were life lessons. They were really, really fantastic. So started working. There were some fantastic kids I worked with. and some very challenging ones. There was so many kids whose parents I'm still in touch with. Just yesterday, I got a message from one of the patients who I used to work with, and she sent me a video of her son playing on the keyboard at his annual day. And I said, how? And I wrote back to her, and it's been years since I worked with her son. And I wrote back to her and I said, how fantastic this is. And I'm so proud of him, and how lovely it is to see this. And she said, you've been such an instrumental part of his growing years that we couldn't have done this without you. And that is something which no feeling can replace reading words
Very
like
true.
that. So it's a really lovely feeling.
So it's very interesting. I mean, when you have an autistic child at home, you would have preferred that your workplace would be something that you could go away from the autistic background, but you actually went into a bigger ocean, and helping others. What worked better? Being a mom to an autistic child helped you to be able to understand those kids better? Or was it the other way around, that because you came across so many different cases, it helped you to improve your relationship with Veer, I would say?
I think I will say this first, that a lot of organizations have been started by parents of kids who are autistic or who have whatever kind of disability, and a lot organizations, therapists, a lot of them are parents. So I'm not the only one. But I think, to come to your second question, it works both ways. We benefited from all that I learned, and I benefited in terms of dealing with the other parents with a lot more empathy, because I understood exactly what they were going through. I will, however, say that when I was at Ummeed, I never revealed that I was a parent, because I think I hadn't reached that stage of acceptance yet in my own journey. And so I never revealed that I was a parent until I think the last maybe year and a half. But otherwise, nobody knew I was a parent.
So after a long journey, it was in 2020 when you decided to move on and become independent author. What prompted the change? And
I think I'd been at Ummeed for 10 years then, and my son was 15 then. I think he needed me more. I think that kids need you when they're very little, and then they need you again when they're teenagers. That's the most. And I felt he really needed me. And so I also felt that while I had done a lot of work with kids, that now I had another purpose, and which was to take my story out into the world, and I needed to fulfill that purpose. So that's why I quit. I decided to write my story, and it became a book, Beyond the Blue.
what was the experience like building up that book? And I know you've been an author in the past, but I'm sure this one was far more personal, far more emotional for you. Anything different this time around? Anything that stayed with you? Any memories from the book publication? The joy that you would have got when the book came out must have been different and special.
Yeah, so this one was really cathartic. I wrote the first chapter, and I went to my husband and I was crying, and I said, I am reliving everything. I don't think I can write this book. And he said, no, you have to write it. This is a story you have to tell. And it was so easy to write, in a sense, because it was like the words were just gushing out. So I'll tell you, I started writing in February 2020. And then the lockdown happened. And I thought I will take at least a year to finish it. By end of June, I was done. And I had written 50,000 words. And I could not believe that I was done, because it was, and honestly, if you were to ask me, I could have written 10 more chapters. But I knew that I had to call it quits sometimes, because otherwise it would become like a big tome. But it just came out. Everything that I think was inside me just came out. But at the same time, I needed people to really kind of tell me that, is this complete rubbish that I've written, or is it something worth reading? Because I mean, I thought it was great, but that just because I thought it was great may not, other people may not. And so I got an editor, because I was very clear I would self-publish. So I got an editor, and she read it and she she edited it and stuff. And then I said, okay, I wanted to look a particular way. So my niece, her name is 𝗧𝗹𝗂𝗏, she's an illustrator and she's a designer and she does beautiful work. She said, I'd love to design it. And so all the illustrations in the book are hers. And she conceived of the cover. And then on the chapter heads, she said, I want Veer to write out the chapter heads for me. So all the chapter heads were in his writing. All of them are written in his writing. Then she said, okay, do we have any poems? So then we incorporated some poems that he wrote with another therapist of his, which she used in her PhD thesis. So we got those and we brought in those poems and we used those poems. And so we really made it into this really beautiful thing. And it was finally came out in November 2020. And it was just lovely to have it out. Before I sent it for publication, I made my daughter read it and I made my husband read it, because I told them, I said, look, this is our lives laid bare. Okay, I mean, there are instances of when my husband and I have fought. There are instances of my daughter telling me that she hates my son when she was younger. And I said, look, you are going to, I mean, it's essentially everybody who reads it knows who you are and your life is going to be laid bare.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. And they read it and they said, fantastic, go for it. And so it came out in 2020, but I did not expect what followed, which was that there was this outpouring of people writing to me saying, this is, you've told my story and I've read your book, and there's so much hope that I'm getting from it. And I think what really helped was that what I did was that I approached people I knew, like therapists, doctors, speech therapists, educators, and sent them sample chapters. And I asked them to send me a little write-up or a testimonial kind of thing. And that made such a big difference, because I got these from people who were really fantastic and very, very esteemed in the autism world in India. And that really, really helped. And of course, the foreword was written by Dr. Vibha Krishnamurthy, who is not only Veer's developmental pediatrician, but was also my boss and my my mentor, my guide. And so she is also an extremely esteemed developmental pediatrician. And so all those factors put together really helped me to kind of put the whole thing together and to make it become the book that it was.
How did the title come about? Was there a story behind it as well?
Yeah, I don't know. It just came to me one day, that I was just thinking, what should I call it? And, blue is the color associated with autism. And at that time, a lot of people use this. They use a puzzle piece to denote autism. And this was before the rise of before self-advocates just became very, very vocal and said, look, we're not puzzle pieces to be figured out. Stop calling us puzzle pieces.
Yeah,
we're people.
True. Yeah.
And so this blue and the puzzle piece was associated with autism. And there's this whole campaign which comes out every April called Light It Up Blue, where there are lots of monuments across the world which are lit up blue. But my whole thing was that I always used to feel that as Veer grew, when he was younger, I used to look at him and only see autism. That's all I saw. Anything he would do, I'd say, oh, that's because he's autistic. This is because he's autistic. And this is what I saw in my patients as well. The parents would say, for example, if the child was not eating, they'd say, is that because he's autistic? And I'd say, no, it must be because he's got something going on in his stomach. Please check it out. He could be constipated or something. Everything does not have a root in autism. And also that there is a child beyond that autism. That first and foremost, this person is a child. Then they are on the autism spectrum. So look at them as a child first, or as an individual first, and then see the autism. So that was it. And also when the world looks at autistic people, they think of them and they think only autism. They don't see the potential. They don't see what all these kids have. They don't see the amazing things that they can do. They don't see the amazing people they are. Like my son has this really silly, funny sense of humor. He has us in splits all the time. He's very, very sweet. He makes these origami flowers and shapes and things like that and gives it to all my daughter and her friends and anybody, and makes cards for people and things like that. I mean, honestly, it's just a very sweet, endearing quality about him. Now, he is the way he is. Is it because of the autism? No, that's because of the person he is.
Great.
And so really to see the person for who they are, for all their strengths, their challenges, their quirk, the special qualities they have, all the fantastic things they are, and also the non-fantastic things they are. It doesn't mean that just because they're on the spectrum that they're absolutely angelic. No, they can be very difficult sometimes. But see them as a person, as an individual, not just as the blue of the autism.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what the title is.
You did a TED talk as well on the topic. Now, is speaking about it in a TED environment much more difficult than writing a book, because book is behind the scenes, you can take your time to compose, or it came very naturally to you just because you knew the topic so well and the subject was so close to your heart?
So the TED talk was actually shot in my house because it was during the time of COVID. I would have loved to do an in-person TED talk, but I can imagine that would have been extremely difficult. But having said that, even this one was really, really hard to do because I had to position the camera in a particular way. I had to make sure that I had I had to say the talk from beginning to end. I had to make sure I had my script completely kind of cleared. I had to pretty much know entire chunks of it because I couldn't read it and splice it together. Even though there was no live audience, I think it's easier when there is a live audience because you go
Yeah.
there and you don't have to manage camera and lighting and angles and things like that. And I had to do this all myself. And so really it was something which I had to do myself, which was I think much tougher than if I had to do it in person. Yeah, I mean, of course, it is difficult. But what I love about talking about this as well as writing about it is that it can help change the way people think and how they view autistic individuals. And so I think that is something which I really, really enjoy, to be able to help in some small way to change those perceptions.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And how did Buddy Up Network happen? And what's the story behind the name?
So that is really quite something. I had thought that Veer would never have friends in his life. I would always stress about him having friends. In fact, I remember when he was younger, he was, socialization is something which is very important. And so we were told you should have these structured play dates. And so I was told you must organize these structured play dates and invite another child over, and then the child and you will sit, and the child and we will sit there, and you have to have a list of activities, and they should play for this much time. You give them a snack and they go home. And what would happen is either they would both come and Veer would be crying in one corner, or the child would be crying in one corner, or they would sit and they would back each other literally and play, or the child would end up playing with Gayatri sometimes, who's Veer's twin sister. And all these made me feel like so much of a failure as a mother. It made me feel like I was just, that I couldn't, that what sort of mother am I? I can't even organize a play date for my child. And that really made me feel awful. And so at some point of time, I said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to leave it. I am not going to get involved in his social life. He will just figure it out by himself. Let him just figure it out. And so I left it. But here was this very lonely boy. And when he was about 13, Dr. Vibha Krishnamurthy, who's his developmental pediatrician, told me that, there's this other young boy called Mihan. He has Down syndrome. You should get in touch with Mihan's mom. And I thought to myself, I said, oh God, this is going to be a repeat of those play dates. Leave it. And so I actively avoided Monisha, who's Mihan's mom, for almost a year and a half. And then finally we got the boys together. And when we did, it was really amazing because they really clicked. And so I remember leaving that meeting and asking Veer, I said, would you like to meet Mihan again? And he said, yes. And so we met again and again and again, about 7 or 8 times. And each time Monisha and I were there. And then after that, we sent them out for lunch alone. And I was very stressed about that. I drew a whole flow chart for Veer of what could potentially happen. And they went out for lunch and they had a great time. And that was just the beginning of it. I mean, then they moved on to attend this boot camp where they made more friends. And then they went and attended. They still do attend this life skills and employability skills program called 𝗧𝗹𝗸𝗀 community, where again they've made a whole bunch of friends. So they are now, Veer has a very rocking social life. He's out, he's about, he's going for movies, concerts, dinner, lunches. And then at some point of time, Monisha and I said, okay, these two have found their friends, but What about the rest? There are so many kids out there who are so lonely,
Mhm.
who don't have friends. What are we going to do about them? And that's when we said, okay, let's do something about this. And so that's how we decided to build the app, which is a social app for people with disabilities. And we started thinking about it in about, I'd say March, April 2023. We started working on the tech in about September 23. And a year later, in October 24, is when we launched. So we're about a year and 4 or 5 months old now. We have about 7,700 downloads.
Wow.
We've got about 3,900 active users. It's a pan India app. It's in English and Hindi. It's accessible. It's safe. It's inclusive. We have people of different ages, but then we started noticing that there were majority of the people were between 20 to 30 and 30 to 40, and a lot of them were looking for the opposite gender. So we said, okay, should we make this into a dating app, or what should we do? So we said, okay, we don't want to be the Tinder swipe right, swipe left type of app, but what we do want to do is give people an option. And so we changed things around so that users can now indicate when they make a profile whether they are looking for friendship, love, or both. We have two streams. We've got a self-user stream and a stream and a caregiver stream. And similarly, caregivers can also indicate whether they're looking for friendship for their children, which they can do for their under 18 children as well as their over 18 children who not be able to operate the app by themselves, for love for their over 18 children, or for both for their children.
What's the
So
percentage split between caregivers and actual people using it?
I would say self users is about 65 to 70%, and
Okay.
the rest are caregivers.
And was there a global template of this? Did you know of any other apps of this
So,
nature?
so there is an app. There's an app in the US called Making Authentic Friendships. There is an app in the UK called Datability. At when we started this, there was pretty much nothing. There used to be an Indian app called Ink Love, which had existed. And we know the founder, so we went and met her, and she basically gave us her blessing to go ahead and make this. And it's such a niche market that everyone we kind of talked to, because we didn't know what would happen, right? We make the product, and then what do you do? We had no idea what our market would be. We had a rough estimate. We don't have prevalence studies on disability. There's hardly any prevalence studies on disability in India. So we didn't even know who our target audience was. We had no idea how many people will download the app, how many people have down smartphones. So really, essentially, we were going in blind into this market and just going for it. But we spoke to so many people, did focus groups. We did spoke to a lot of people in business, spoke to a lot of people in the NGO space, in the disability space, spoke to people in tech, and they all said, you know what, it's a great idea, do it. So with a lot of faith and a lot of belief, we just kind of jumped off the cliff, so to speak. And it's been about a year and a bit, and we're still going strong.
And you've given talks at various corporates as well.
Yes.
Is there one thing about the space around autism that you feel has still not changed and still needs focus and attention?
I think there's a lot that has not changed. I think awareness is the starting point. People are still not even aware of what autism is. Once that comes about, there is still the acceptance piece of accepting people for who they are, accepting that they can do jobs, that they all have the potential to do something. I mean, there are very, very smart people, but there are people with differing kinds of intelligence who can do something or the other. All it requires is a change of systems, a certain amount, a little bit of change for people to be employed. I think the idea that they are unemployable is very strong still amongst a lot of people, which is why most of them don't have jobs. The other thing I think is that they all feel that they don't want friends and that they're very happy to live in their own world. That's not true. They want friends, they want to be with other people. They have as much of a desire for friendship and human connection as does anybody else, because they can be extremely, extremely lonely. They can have no one to kind of connect with. And they don't, it doesn't mean that that just people who can speak need those connections. You could be non-speaking and also need connection. So I think those two things are really important to point out.
What's been Gayatri's role all through? I know this is a touchy topic because when you have a special child in the family, the other child tends to feel left out, different kind of approaches for both the kids every now and then. And now you just mentioned that, Veer is finally living a life that you had always aspired him for. He's got friends, he's partying, he's traveling. What's been the sibling relationship and how it's evolved, and what's the most beautiful thing you see about the two of them when they're together?
I think it's evolved from I hate him, why was he born, to understanding that his brain was wired differently, as she used to put it. That's how he explained it to her, and that's how she's understood it her whole life. To standing up for him when he was being bullied, to, tolerating him a little bit through her teens, to really coming to love him very, very fiercely and protectively. Often when I get irritated with him, she'll say, just leave him alone, Mama. It's all right. Just don't be so hard on him. To being someone who she can't live without. And witnessing this change has been really quite amazing. It's been lovely because she's at college, and I used to worry about him when she left for college, because I would think, I would kind of imagine that she would have this, this fantastic life, and there'd be three of us would be left behind looking very sad. And that was far from the case. He, in fact, it was funny because he kind of flowered and blossomed while she was gone, enjoyed being an only child, but at the same time, he's very misses his sister. They chat, they send each other funny voice messages and funny videos, and they're very happy to be together. So it's really been an amazing kind of evolution of their relationship to witness as well.
All this through you started from your childhood dream of being a writer and went on to go big time into therapy, and
Right.
now you're running an app which is more like a tech entrepreneur, if I may call. Any moments which kind of stood out in the whole journey, something that was funny in a way, something that has kind of left a long impression on you, any instance or anything that could be like a defining moment for you, in the sense,
I think, I don't know about defining moment, but I'll tell you a funny moment. So Monisha, my partner, and I think now know 0.01% of tech. At that time when we started, we had no clue about tech. We thought, okay, we'll build this app, we'll put it out on the market, and that's it. Our job is done. So we were working with our
how can building an app be so difficult compared to using an app?
Absolutely. We thought that, after we built it and it's out, it's in the App Store, in the Play Store, that's it. It'll just happen, it'll all be very good. And then we'll have time to do other stuff. And little did we know. So our tech partner, 𝗧ici𝘂𝗿𝗴𝗲, is fantastic. And he would, every time we would ask him a question, he would just look at us and think, how are these women not able to get this? Because we had literally no tech brain at all. So that led to a lot of laughs, and we now laugh about it and tell him about how we could see how frustrated he was getting with us. But I think there have been tons of beautiful moments along the way, whether it is building Buddy Up Network, whether it is talking to corporate organizations and have someone coming and approaching me later saying thank you, that meant a lot. I have a kid on the spectrum and it was so good to hear you. Whether it was the responses to Beyond the Blue, whether it was all the kids and families that I've worked with, and some of whom I'm still in touch with, and hearing a child say their first word, seeing a child actually look into the eyes of the parent. All these are things which are so fantastic and beautiful. There are really no words to kind of recount them.
Discussion about your family can't be complete without discussion around jazz. And it's understood that the dogs have a higher sensory power to be able to understand the circumstances or situation or thoughts which a person is going through. How's the relationship between Jazz and Veer been?
Got our first dog, Bagel, for Veer, thinking that he will be, because we had also read a lot about animals and autism and how the connection is so deep. And it turned out to be, oh wow, it was not a good choice. He was a very barky dog, not
Oh.
at all affectionate, and he bit all of us, me,
So
Veer,
was it a
Mohit.
breed issue or?
It was, I think it was a breed issue. I don't know if it was a breed issue. I think maybe it was just him. He just came into our lives to teach us God knows what lesson. And he was just very, very hard to deal with. He died, poor thing, just a week short of his 10th birthday. And then we said, we're not getting another dog, because we could see that Veer's anxiety had gone down tremendously without Bagel around. So we said, we can't do this to him. And then the house felt really lonely. And so we said, and very quiet. And so we said, okay, what if we got another dog that was more appropriate? And so we got Jazz, who's our French bulldog. And it's really amazing because while Veer was not, it wasn't an instant connection, it built over time. So he walks her, he was responsible for walking her in the afternoons. And she would listen to him a lot. And he has over time, he still gets bothered when she barks, but he has over time really expressed love towards her. He bathes her. She sleeps in his room. He gives her hugs and kisses. And even if she barks and he gets very, very upset, because I think the sensory noise bothers him a lot, he goes to her later and he says, that was a very bad thing to do, Jazz. And then he gives her a kiss and says, don't do it again. And so it's a very cute relationship that they've got. So I think it depends on the dog. Honestly, the first dog was a disaster for him because he was so anxious with him around. And but Jazz has been a blessing.
What's coming up for you next? What are you looking forward to?
I think just building the app and getting it to venture to all parts of the country, doing a lot of interesting talks with the organizations. I don't think I'd write another book. Every time I say that, I write another one, but I really don't think I will write another book. I don't think I have anything more left in me to say. But just, enjoying seeing the children grown up and reach a point where they are independent, they're thriving, they are able to kind of navigate life. We're much more independently than I ever thought he would. Still keeps coming back to us for lots of things, but that's totally fine. For me, I think a successful life is a life where I have impacted somebody's life. And so hoping to be able to do that with as many people as I can.
What's something that you learned about life which you feel very proud about? Something that you feel that, okay, I've learned it through my experience. You have to dig into your spirituality basics.
Yeah, no, I think I will say what Vibha told me years ago when I sat in her clinic, that this journey is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter race. And so just like in a marathon, you have to replenish yourself with bananas and glucose and water. You need to be able to do that as you run this journey of life. You have to take breaks. You have to be kind to yourself. You have to look after yourself, because only then will you be able to look after the other people in it and run for as long as you want to run.
An advice which you are glad you didn't take it and it proved to be wrong?
That I didn't take. I think many times when Veer was younger, I was told things like, I don't know if he will talk, I don't know if he'll read, I don't know if he'll write, I don't know if he can go to school, I don't know if he will have friends. And these are things which I'm glad I didn't believe. Even while I was despairing, there would be a little voice inside me which would say, he'll do it, have faith. And that voice would be very, very faint, but it would always be there.
A question which you're still looking for an answer to.
I would have said that why does autism occur in individuals, but actually I'm not seeking the answer to that, because I think that part of the great kind of cosmos and the great diversity that we have on this planet, I think autistic individuals are just part of that. And I think that they just make up part of that kind of diversity. And so really, while it used to bother me, I used to read tons of articles and watch lots of videos when Veer was younger. It's something that I don't think about much at all anymore.
Now comes the favorite part. What's the question that you have for me?
What's a question that I have for you? Okay, what is your definition of courage?
I think, and it's interesting, and I mentioned this in the previous podcast as well. This is probably the 60th episode, and I asked the definition of courage. Not a single definition has been ever repeated.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So the whole story behind asking definition of courage is because there is no definition of courage, right? Courage is what you thought is difficult and you did it, period, right? Courage is what you perceive as not okay and you do it, right? Courage is sometimes being quiet when everyone is urging you to speak is courage. And the reverse is also true, right?
Yes.
When everyone is quiet, you are the one who's speaking up is courage. Not moving when everyone is moving is courage. Moving when everyone is stopping is courage, right? It's all about standing out without worrying about the consequences of standing out. Whether that's something rude as well, that's something nasty as well, taking drugs,
Right.
right? But the whole point there is, if you display courage in one activity, are you translating that into another activity? So if you did something really wrong, did you discover that courage in you that you could do something when people would have told you not to? And how are you using or learning from it? So I think the problem comes in is that people don't learn from their aspects of courage. Failure, that's an act of courage. Provided you jump, you leapfrog from that failure, you take that moment of embarrassment as a driving force for you to like really dunya ko dikha dunga types and actually come out strong. The problem comes is when the society or your ecosystem does not allow you to be able to take that leapfrog, and then you are relegated to a failure for the rest of your life, because then you kind of, that failure becomes an identity which you're not able to shed. It's been memorable going through your journey, and it's quite inspiring, the stuff that you've done, and come a long way from where you were to where you stand, being a tech entrepreneur. And hope that you continue your journey to make a difference in many people's life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.